A gentle wave lapped against the harbor wall, and on the walkway above 2 guards in horse-mane-crested helmets leaned idly against their spears. They shivered in their cuirasses and wrapped their cloaks tightly about them, muttering to one another of the day's events. As they looked out over the dappled waters, the moon bathed the great columned temples of the city behind them in a soft light. They were about to resume their patrol when a scraping sound made them turn and squint into the shadows below. The wall dropped down 30 feet, and craning their heads they could dimly make out the tide as it lapped against the dark stone. But now something was making its way up the worn brickwork, a gigantic shadow that clung tenaciously to the rocks and moved with dexterous agility. The 2 guards stared in amazement as a mighty corded arm slapped over the wall in front of them. Then, impulsively, a titanic figure heaved itself up into the starlight and swung itself over the rim. Bare feet slapped wetly on the paved ground, and a man loomed up to stand before them in the moonlight. "Halt, and be recognized!" one of the guards shouted, lowering his spear. He flung back his scarlet cape and lifted his shield. The giant figure stood motionless, legs planted wide, water dripping from his naked skin. He spread his hands slowly and grinned a strong white-toothed smile. He was naked, but for a scrap of leopard skin knotted about his loins. From a belt at his waist hung a gigantic curved scimitar in a leopard skin sheath. Here was no man of the Western race. Before them stood an ebon giant from the little-known lands of the distant south, wild, untamed lands that bred men hard and savage as the wilderness that surrounded them. "You're not of Thanya," growled the second guard. "Who are you? What are you doing climbing our city wall in the dead of night?" Wiping a thick corded wrist over his brow, the giant shook his shaven head before answering. "Nay, Thanyan. I come from Damzula. Men call me Bohun. I escaped the oars of a slaver ship this morning, and have spent the day swimming yonder ocean. Since dusk I hid, clinging to the hull of one of those warships." He lifted a great corded arm and indicated the galley standing in the harbor. "Knowing how you pale-skinned folk fear the sight of a free man of the tribal kingdoms, I waited until nightfall to scale your walls. Now, direct me to food and drink. I am weary, and have not eaten in the setting of 2 suns." "Manatus balls, you presume much, stranger. Firstly, there are questions that need answering. If you are an escaped slave—" Bohun's eyes flashed angrily. "Do I look like a slave, you dog?" He spoke with the warning rumble of a rousing lion. "By Tagula! The last man who thought as much is now holding council in hell." "You speak of murder." "Murder? Ha! If strangling the fool who tried to whip me on the deck of his own ship and throwing him into the ore pits for the other captives is murder, then so be it. I took a blade from the quartermaster who sought to intervene." He slapped the 2-handed sword at his side, then dived overboard and swam away amidst a storm of arrows. He shrugged and hooked a thumb through his belt. "Some would say my freedom was justly earned." "All the same, it's best you come with us," growled the guard, moving forward. Bohun just smiled and folded his massive arms over his chest. They noticed his left wrist still supported a manacle from which depended 4 links of broken chain. He shook his head slowly and made clicking sounds with his tongue. "Not going to happen. How are 2 unarmed men going to convince me to come with them?" The soldiers looked sidelong at one another. Bohun leaned forward, his hands striking like serpents toward the short swords at their sides, ripping them from their scabbards. He stepped back, the 2 blades gleaming naked in his hands. Then, before they knew what he was about, he threw his arms wide, and the 2 swords went spinning through the air to disappear over the harbor wall. There was a clinking sound as they hit the stone far below, followed by a faint splash. Then, before they could recover their wits, his scimitar hissed from its sheath in a flash of frosted fire. They felt the wind of its passing before he resheathed it with a single fluid motion. Stunned, the two guards fell back. The heads of their spears lay at their feet, neatly severed by a single shearing blow. The first guard, lowering his shield dejectedly, mumbled a curse. The second shook his head in wonder. "By Helios," he breathed. "No man such as you was ever born to wear chains, I'll grant you that. Begone, then. It will take us some time to reach the other side of the harbor to raise the alarm." With that, they backed slowly away from him, holding their shields pressed tightly against their chests. Nodding, the black man moved like a great silent shadow toward the moon-washed walls of the city. They watched him for a moment as he melted into the dark before turning and hurrying back along the causeway.